Well, hello and good afternoon, everyone. Hope as everyone's doing well. Apologize, my hair is still wet. It's got done working out. Anyway, hi. Welcome to the ComicBase live stream. I'm your host, Pete Bickford. I'm out here in beautiful Franklin, Tennessee, and it is actually idyllic today, so hope you guys are all doing well. Do a quick check-in on the chat. By the way, if you guys have questions you'd like to have posted to the chat, please post them now on YouTube. And whoa, and we're getting echo, so I'm gonna kill that right now. Okay, awesome. Anyway, please post your questions to the chat, and we'll handle as many of them as we can. I've got a hard out at for 1 hour here, so no matter where we are in the discussion, I'm gonna have to drop it there because I have another commitment I got to get to. So we'll try to make this as productive as possible, and we'll take it from there. Anyway, hello everyone. Hello Andre, Mike, hail Richard, and great to see you, Dave. Great to see you again. Hello all of you from the sticks in Tennessee. Yes, coming right back at you, man. I'll make sure I got the scanner up here so I can see the chat messages. Yes, there we are. Excellent. And yes, I can hear Pete shuffling around. You have no idea what it's like here 2 minutes before showtime here because I don't have an ability to route just my my audio routing here. I don't have the ability to route just the microphone into the feed without routing background music, things like that. So what's happening usually is my family and things like that are all running to run on errands, dogs barking, neighbors next door doing weird things like that. So I have to dance between having the mic on and off right up until the moment of showtime. So this is a homebrew production, folks. I don't know if you're getting that one, but this is the highest quality entertainment that one man can manage on the internet. We'll see what we can do. Hello, Oro, and John. Great to see everyone here, man. We got a nice crowd here today. All right, so let's get to it. Let's see here. So, first thing I want to talk about is ComicBase version 20.0.2.1799. I have no Revolutionary War references for 1799. I gotta admit, my own personal knowledge of American history takes a real drop off after the 1780s and until you hit right around the Civil War years. So I have no fantastic historical dates to keep the ear straight for you. Whiskey Rebellion was in there somewhere, I'm not sure. But anyway, but the main things that this new version will do, and you can get this, by the way, if you go to, in ComicBase, if you go under Internet, check for updates, make sure in your preferences you have it set to check for interim updates, otherwise you won't see it. But the main things this new version does, there's two kind of minor things and then one really big thing. The minor things, when you do a quick change, dates can now be blank. So, in other words, it is possible to blank out a range of dates, when you're setting them in. This got driven to us because someone actually submitted a big range of Topolinos, which they put in there somehow, and they were giving us dates that were stretching all the way up to like the 2030s, which clearly was not accurate. And we had to blank them. It's like, wait a minute, when we threw in that cool date picker, you give people a nice interface for forbidding date material, and we neglected to have a way to blank out dates. So that's been fixed now, so that's a good thing. We also managed to shorten up the print dialogue a little bit. We got a little bit more aggressive about the spacing on that one. So if you do have one of the smaller monitors, the minimum spec monitor is I think 1368 by 728, something like that. You should now be able to see the entire dialogue on your screen, even if you're maybe just a little bit shy of that one. But it's much more friendly to laptops, so you can actually see the names of the buttons, which turns out that's important. And then the big change, you will notice when you first download this version that it will go through an extra minute or so. It'll say checking your tables. What's really doing there is it's doing some new indexing work on your comic, book, and magazine tables, where we reformulated the indexes in a way which wound up being just massive in terms of barcode scanners. We actually took the time it took to scan a comic book and find it using barcode scanners dropped in our testing from 1.3 seconds to 0.23 seconds. So in other words, it now takes 0.17% of the time it used to in order to find a given comic using the barcode scanner. Now, granted, that's the time required to find the comic, the time required to display it on screen, things like that. That's still the same. So some fraction of a second is still like that. But if you are going in using add by barcode, the difference between just last week's version and this version is remarkable. So please give that a shot. I hope you enjoy it. And if you're using any version of ComicBase, really, do download the latest update. It's not a required update because we're trying to keep those to just quarterly, but if you do use a barcode scanner, you'd be a fool, I tell you, not to go ahead and download the latest version and install that one now. Again, look for it when you launch it to say version 17.99. So 21.0.2.1799 are the magic numbers. And let us know what you think. By the way, if you want to get in on any kind of background discussion we're having for just the different buildings of ComicBase, or ideas we're thinking of doing which aren't really ready for prime time, or that we're just sort of bantering out between ourselves, we are going to start opening up membership in our Slack group again. So if you are interested in joining up, kind of like the behind the scenes crew for the next versions of ComicBase, send me a note, pbickford@human-computing.com. I think I still have a button which will display that, Chiron, or did I lose it in the reconfiguration of my board? I did indeed. Apologize for that. But anyway, the email is pbickford@human-computing.com. Send me a note, say you'd like to be part of our Slack group. And that basically is the internal chat group we've got. Uses with that team collaboration tool called Slack, where you can get in on the discussion of features we're considering doing, things that bugs we're finding in interim builds, whatever the thing is. But it helps to get your feedback early on these things. And if you'd like to be part of that, please let us know. All right, so that is the main news on that one. Let me do a quick check of where we're at on things. Were they worried about the 1.8K bug in 1799? No, not yet, because they hadn't invented the modern computer. And when they did, well, anyway, that wasn't a thing. Okay, I wish I could be 1/10 as efficient at getting out of bed in the morning. Sweet. Okay, so other things that are in the news. First of all, I have a plea to all of you. We have, as you guys have heard me mention a number of times on the program, whenever you send a database or a report to our servers to be processed, it gets run through by a process called Jimmy. Jimmy is after Jimmy Olsen, the boy reporter, just as you saw in the ad for today's thing. And we've been running some tests over the last couple weeks to say, what can we do for all the weird databases that people ever send us that, kind of hose up Jimmy, instead of just saying, get out of here. We're trying to actually find ways of actively correcting problems as they come in, due to bad data and, different things like that. And some things we can correct on the fly, and it doesn't take any problem. That just becomes part of Jimmy. So in other words, you send us something with a malformed date of some sort, we can generally, fix that as we go. But there are certain databases you can send us. They're just in bad shape. They have just junk in them. They're from ancient versions of ComicBase, whatever the thing is. And if it takes a lot of time for Jimmy to correct the problem, it just becomes one of those things where we skip your file. Now, we're working on sending you a note when we do that to say, yeah, sorry guys, you sent us the following file on this date, and it's got problems in it, and we can't work with it. Please fix up your file, otherwise we can't generate reports for you. It will do you an enormous amount of good and do us an enormous amount of good if you all would take a few moments with the new version of ComicBase, with ComicBase 21.0.2.1799. Go to your file menu, and let me actually show that. Let me hide a few things on the screen here so I don't clutter up my own screen too much. Oh, that's why I got the echo of myself. I had a browser window up with myself in it from when I was getting ready to start the live stream, so it was playing myself back 12 seconds separate from myself. So okay, I've got that worked out now. All right, so let's switch over to camera 2. If you let me go full screen here so you can actually see it. Okay, if you go to your file menu, go to File Tools, and then go to Rebuild Lists, and go ahead and just once check these first 4. I'll tell you what these all are. So Rebuild List in general is a utility built into ComicBase which just recalculates all the calculatable stuff and does certain cleanup functions in things like the notes fields and so forth. So, for instance, series information, one of the things it recalculates is it rebuilds, if the name of the title is Incredible Hulk, the, one of the calculated fields is the display title, which is The Incredible Hulk. Other display fields are things like Oh, if there's a list of years that the title stretched on, if like so, for instance, if you say the year stretched from 1978 to 79 and picked up again in 1983 through 85, or 2003 to present, it actually builds a searching. It's called a date mask, but it's a computed field with ones and zeros for all the years along that entire time range that the series was running in. It'll recompute things like that. More importantly, so that's esoteric as hell. You have no reason to care about this at all. Frankly, it never comes to WoW, so it's not a big problem. The things that really come up, though, a lot are things like, is the title in stock or not? And certainly in older versions of ComicBase, there used to be very, very clever ways you could do of changing a quantity and knock something in or out of stock and have it not immediately catch that the title now had an issue associated with it and put the title in stock. And so sometimes your title stock list wouldn't match, and there used to be a background program that would periodically just make sure that part got synced up so that all those lists would never get too far out. The item information will have things like it'll go through every date in your program and make sure that it follows international date formatting conventions as it looks at the data that's stored in the database. So that way, if you've got a database that you had been used in the U.S. and then you suddenly switch over to England, where the month and the days are reversed of each other in terms of the order, that suddenly doesn't cause problems for the program anymore if they're all stored in year, month, day format. Crazy amount of stuff like that. Most recently, in last week's update, I mentioned that we did a lot of cleanup in the notes, where we'll do a lot now to standardize how the notes field's laid out, to remove redundant notes. So, for instance, if you say FIRST appearance of Spider-Man and then 1: Spider-Man, it'll just come down as first appearance of Spider-Man, and it'll only say that once as opposed to saying it twice. And try to standardize some of the ways that we talk about variant covers and so forth. So definitely worth running through. And by the way, if you are feeling very compulsive and want to run it through multiple times, don't be particularly surprised if it catches an enormous amount of cleanup the first time out, but it catches a few more things the second time out, because some things it kind of knocks them into the right format, and then it says, oh, and now this looks redundant to me, or that it figures that it can go a little further now that it's a little bit more cleaned up. So you actually can benefit slightly from running it more than once, but once would be great. Once in particular would keep your database from hitting our backend database and blowing up Jimmy, because right now, like I say, we do have Jimmy, our reporting process, set in a mode where instead of just carrying on when it sees a problem file, it kind of lets an operator know and hangs around waiting for one of us to deal with it so we can examine things in flight to essentially learn ways to harden up Jimmy so it doesn't have this problem in the future. But I'm just saying, we're getting lots of data, appreciate the data, but what's even better right now is if you guys stop the problem before it even gets to us so we don't need to patch it up. You've already sending us clean stuff. So yeah, if you could run the file tools and do that right now, that would be a wonderful thing for us, and we would very much appreciate it. One other thing I would appreciate if you guys could do, and I realize I'm asking for a lot here, but if you would go to your Sidekick, and let me go ahead and pull mine up right now. And one thing I neglected to do before showtime was to get my main screen switched over to the display screen. So let me go ahead and pull up my Sidekick. Alright, so over there. Let me go ahead and be all clever and stuff and put myself in picture-in-pictures. Cool. So if you go to your Sidekick, pull up the list of databases. That's the gear icon over here, or go to Settings. Look through the list of databases you've got over here, and two things. One, make sure you've checked over, using file tools, all the databases you're sending us, because these are all the ones that you're going to be sending us when you back up or you check for updates or things like that. And you get rid of anything in there that you don't need. In particular, if you have anything in there that's like a safety copy or a backup or things like that, you can lose it. You don't need to be backing up your backups. You don't need to be processing content updates on your backups and so forth. And honestly, one of these days, pretty soon, we're going to stop updating those things. So if you do send us things that are backups or safety copies, we're just going to say like, yeah, we're not going to do anything with that one, because there comes a time when we need to cut down the space of problems that we worry about. And so if you could head off that problem at the pass by removing anything you don't need from that list of databases that you've got going on over here, I would very much appreciate it. So anyway, thank you guys. Please take a few moments, and if you could take care of those two things, then my life gets a little easier. So I appreciate that. All right. Let me do a quick check back of the chats. Let's see. Oh, yes. John says, too bad I'm not that fast when I have to do a manual search barcodes. And John P says, have I picked a new cover design for ComicBase yet? Like to suggest a Western or a pirate style version. You know, it's funny. We did pick a new version. I'm still waiting to see sketches on it before we finalize it. The artist, when we went back and we gave her the concept of the whole thing, she's like, oh, that sounds really good, but I was kind of hoping to do pirates. I'm like, yeah. Anyway, so it's not pirates this time out. I'm not going to say what it is until we get the sketch in, because I want to make sure that the whole thing works. So sometimes you have an idea for a cover, and until the artist goes and lays it out and puts the figures in the right place and draws the right perspective, you don't really know if the cover's really going to read. But I'm pretty psyched about this one. I think it's gonna go, and I think it's gonna be just one of the neatest covers we ever did. But I'll know more. I'll be able to share more on that hopefully in a week or two. It usually takes a little while for the artist to kind of kick it around her head and lay out things. She one of the great things about Laurel Bleckman is she tends to think through things a lot. So and so as a result, when it comes to actually make them happen, they're very close to what you were asking for. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. And by the way, there was also a question right at the top, and I want to get to this one before I forget it. Mike says, I have a very specific question. Since the old newsprint issues of Rolling Stones don't fit on my scanner, I'll be taking photos of them with my DSLR. Would images at 720 by 40 be acceptable? It's okay. It's better than nothing. You have two problems with doing it. Well, I have three problems with doing it on a DSLR. And again, I will take a DSLR picture versus nothing any day of the week. I'm grateful for everything you guys do for us. I really am. I do not have a comprehensive collection of Rolling Stones to go and submit to the database. So if anyone does and wants to do this, wow. Thank you so much. What I would suggest, so the problems with shooting flat objects with DSLRs is you have an aspect of camera lenses called spherical aberration, which basically means they hate making perfectly straight lines over long distances. Just like the iris of your eye, it's the same problem. Is things that are right towards the center wind up being very sharp and very straight in focus. As you get out to the edge, things do this. They get wider and wider and more out of skew. That's just, it's a facet of lenses. It applies anywhere lenses apply. Scanners get through this by not using a lens at all. They use a thing called a charged cathode. Good Lord, what's it called? CCD. Charged cathode. I can't remember what the D stands for now. Diode? But basically it's just a sensor where basically if you blast light at the sensor, it converts it into electronic impulses, which then can be converted into digital. And so basically what they do is they've got a sensor on the back either on the back of an element on the back thing or in the entire back of the scanner. But basically they shove light at the thing you're scanning, and then what they get back from it becomes an electronic signal, which then they translate into an image. They stitch it all together into a picture that becomes the image. But because you're literally rolling down a vertical object with a wide platen that never changes like this, and you're just reporting what, it's almost like the way a printer prints, but in reverse. You're just reporting what that sensor on that thing got as it was going down the line. There's no lens defects at all, and so you wind up with very nice straight images of things that are flat and rectangular, which is what comics and magazines and books are. So if you ever can deal with things that are actually put on a scanner, that's by far the most preferable way to deal with it. It also solves your other problems of lighting, and there was a third problem that occurred to me, but I forgot what it was just the moment. But so scanner, if you can do it, I absolutely suggest doing it. There are some really good. I went as a result of a previous chat we had almost a year ago at this time. I wound up picking up a new tabloid size scanner for myself. I want to say it set me back all $400, and it's done great. I will put the name of that in the chat notes. In the show notes when I get over to it. But have a look at that one if you get if you are of a mind to. But that being said, if you want to send me DSLR photos, I'll take them. Send them to me I'll take whatever resolution you got from me. Go ahead and send me a raw file if you want. Oh, don't say camera raw. That's a pain in the tuchus. But if you could send me a 4,000 pixel wide one, we'll do what we got to do to make it work. I'd rather have a Resier file than a non-Resi file because we can always go down in resolution, but we can't go up without making up pixels, and making up pixels never ends well. All right, let's see here. Len says, what is the best way to crop and submit cover images that's already in ComicBase? I don't want to bloat the image size to get ComicBase to ask for it. Like the other similarly picky users to benefit from cleanups. Well, there's a cheap, easy way, which I think you've already discovered, which is if you do make up a few more pixels so it's bigger than the one inside ComicBase, then when you drag it into your ComicBase and upload it to us, it'll say, oh, hey, you have a bigger picture. Can we have it? Because the one criteria that the computer knows when you submit pictures using submit newer corrected pictures is it knows whether the picture you've got is bigger than the one we've got. And so then, so for instance, if I'm going over here to Red Wolf number 1, this picture is however big it is, 1,000 pixels tall. If you submit one that's 2,000 pixels tall, and then you drop it in, so you name it number1.jpg, you drag it over onto the grid here, and then you right click and you say submit new or corrected data, then you'll get a note saying, you have a bigger picture, could we have it? And it'll transmit up to it. That is the no muss, no fuss way to defeat all of our checking to not evil purposes, but it does shortcut the line. I don't mind, honestly. If all you're really doing is doing a better cleanup version of what we've got, and you need to fool our safeguards in order to get it to be accepted without question, that works. I'm not going to say don't do it. The other really nice way to do it. Oh, Steve Dazinger says CCD charge coupled device. Yeah, I was wildly off. I'm sorry. I was thinking cathode ray tubes. And I got confused. But anyway, back to what's his name? The nice way to submit us pictures that are bigger than what we've got or just different than what we've got, a better version, better lighting, better comic that you're scanning, whatever else, is to stick them in an email, send them to support@comicbase.com, and that'll go straight to our editors, and then they will deal with them and copy them in. I'll admit it's slower to deal that way with from our end of things. So if you got a whole bunch like that, honestly, the bloat them up and stick them in way is probably faster for everybody involved. But if we're just talking about the most picture goodness, is probably stick them one by one in an email to our support folks. All right. Robert says, how about ComicBase give a suggestion of rebuild after opening after a set amount of time? Example, after opening 25 times on the 26th opening, you get this suggestion. Yeah, it's not... I'm going to say I wouldn't necessarily want to do that, because I can open up ComicBase, 10,000 times, and it doesn't benefit from any of these rebuild operations as long as nothing weird or unusual has been going on, or if we haven't added some new cleanup routines that would make the data more spiffy. What we tend to do is when we feel like it would really benefit from a rebuild, there's actually in every database there's a thing called a structure version. It's just like there's a version for the program, and then each of your content updates, whether you know or not, has a version number, and that's how it knows that there's a new content update. But we also know each database has a structure version which tells it that this database is current as of all of our thinking as of a certain time. So I think maybe the current structure version is like 21.0.25 or something like that. Like there's been like 25 revisions to the ComicBase 21 structure over time. If you have exactly the same structure we have, in other words, if you'd gone through everything we would automatically do to check up and verify your database, and you'd wind up in exactly the same place, we just say, hey, your structure version matches the last one. It just opens straight up. It doesn't do anything extra. It doesn't take any time at all. On the other hand, if your structure, let's say we go next week and we make it so that the new structure version, we change something, there's a new index somewhere. We change it so the structure version is now 21.0.26. What'll happen is next time you launch a ComicBase that is expecting a 26 version structure, it'll say, your version doesn't match. Let me check some stuff. And it'll verify every index. It'll verify, that all the things it expects to see are there and that they're in the right place. And that's the place where any brand new indexes will automatically get added. But if there's some kind of cleanup-y thing, we keep other versions to know that, all right, we had a real big rethink on how title alphabetization worked back in structure version 17.0.2. That's when we figured out how to deal with Faith from, Valiant Comics, or I remember at one point there was, I forgot, God, I'm sorry, whoever submitted was just, this was genius thinking through the problem, but it was one of those things where he thought through the problem so very, very well, he just embarrassed into saying, yes, your solution is superior than what we're doing. We're going to immediately change our code to add in a whole bunch of stuff which supports your solution. And basically, we took all the things like the Punisher. There was a Punisher, there was the Punisher, there was Punisher volumes 1, 2, 3, 4, and then there was Punisher 5th series, 6th series, 7th series, etc. And he basically suggested a nice supportable algorithm for how we could get all those things to line up very beautifully, all in a row. They'd be the way that a human would expect them to be, regardless of what the alphanumerics of vol comes after, this series. So if I say volume 2 and I just went in alphabetical order, the V's come at the end, right? Whereas the numbers, first series, second series, third series, so forth, those would tend to sort to the top. But then what do you do if there's Punisher and there's the Punisher? Anyway, so at some point about 10 versions of ComicBase ago, somebody came up with just a brilliant scheme for that, and we said, yeah, right, that's the way we're going to do it. You're absolutely right. And what we did is we forced, and if you had a version of ComicBase that was prior to when we redid that, we see that your list hadn't been alphabetized using the new algorithm, and we force an alphabetization to happen. So we have various triggers like that built into the whole database checking process as well. So when we really rethink something, we think it makes a really big difference, when you launch the program, it'll automatically do that kind of checkup for you. But honestly, those things, I remember them because they come up once every few years, or at most when you're talking about things like node optimizations a couple times a year. There's no advantage to running the same checkup again and again on those ones. So I wouldn't suggest it as a feature of every 25th time run a rebuild on everything. What might make sense, though, that said, is it might make sense to throw it in as a maintenance task in Sidekick. That's come up before. I haven't fully embraced it for two reasons. One is Sidekick has a set of functions that he handles, and when you throw new things into Sidekick, then you wind up with a place where code to do the same kind of thing is in two different places, and then every time you update one, you have to make sure you've updated two in exactly the same way, and sometimes the interfaces aren't exactly the same. So it's a little bit more of a headache for us to make that happen. That said, yeah, I could absolutely see that being a function we move into something that doesn't necessarily run in the main program, or maybe it runs on a schedule somewhere. That might be a better place for it. I'm not sure. Let me think on that. We have, I guess, one argument for moving that function over to Sidekick, for instance, would be, for instance, that Sidekick not only can do it from multiple databases, which is always very nice, and it can do it on a schedule, which is also very nice. But the other thing about it is Sidekick is the one place where you can do a backup of ComicBase to the cloud. The reason that came about is because Sidekick needed to be able to back up something that was closed, and ComicBase can't do a backup to the cloud if it's got the database open, not unless it more or less spun up a big hunk of code of itself, which operated on a closed database state, which would just be a very strange thing for the main database to be able to do. So that's why we threw that function into ComicBase. So there is a precedent, at least, for having Sidekick do maintenance tasks on a database that ComicBase itself doesn't do. So yeah, let me think on that one. It's a good suggestion. All right. So let's see here. Hoarder's Hide says, have I ever thought of changing the default database directory location to be something other than the document folder to avoid OneDrive and them doing its evil, most nasty things to the database? Yeah, I think about that every single time I deal with freaking OneDrive. We've got a problem in that Microsoft has decreed for coming up on 3 decades that the place that you are supposed to store documents is the documents folder. And when Windows 98 came around, they got really militant about it. They further introduced the idea of a public documents folder and a shared documents. I'm sorry, a shared documents folder or users' public documents, and then your personal documents. Those are now special blessed folders inside the whole hierarchy, and they have certain default privileges, which is exactly what you'd want. I mean, everything was working exactly the way it was supposed to work. And then they went out, and the OneDrive team over at Microsoft said, hey, we have a great idea. And somebody over at Microsoft blessed the idea of remapping and taking over the documents folder and then doing things that cause active amounts of trouble if you have a program that essentially works the way databases do, where you're working on with a file on disk that is partially in memory, partially on disk at any given time, and this other program, in this case OneDrive, can note that the disk version has changed and start messing with that while the other program is still working with the file. This was an insane move over at Microsoft. I mean, literally whoever came up with it, I would love to have a few words. That said, they haven't left us with a lot of great options as far as how to deal with it, because another thing they did over the years is they've, in response to virus concerns, is they've very much locked down other folders on your computer. You guys might have seen this, is if, for instance, if you try creating a if you try just through a save dialog saving to the top level of making a new folder on the top level of a drive, oftentimes you'll be prevented because when you're working within a program, you're not running as a super user. When you're in Windows Explorer, in other words, when you boot up your computer and you're bouncing around and you're dragging things to files and folders, you're actually running as an administrator account. Whereas when you run within a program, you are typically using much less privileges. This is invisible to you. Windows just automatically, they use a thing called impersonation, where even though I log in as Pete Bickford, the Grand Lord and Master of my computer, it then impersonates a user which has much less privileges. You're running what's called least privilege mode. And the person I am, as soon as I launch a program, suddenly I don't have the ability to do things like saving into the program files directory. Whereas if you try doing it, if you just try to grab and drop a document to the program files directory, you might get a prompt from Windows saying, you sure you want to do this? But you'll be able to do it if you want, because when you're in Windows, out in the file structure, moving things around on the desktop, you are a super user. Inside a program, not. ComicBase needs to run in that least privileged mode. So we can't create folders willy-nilly on your computer. We need to do it within folders that are already blessed, or we have to install folders during the install time, because when you run an installer, you're running as a user called Trusted Installer. You guys might have seen that. And Trusted Installer has more privileges than your average user does, so he can create folders, for instance, and he can write to system directories. But when you're just Joe user, you're not typically allowed to do those things. So yeah, honestly, I think writing to any other directory other than documents is going to cause as many troubles as it solves, probably many more and much more immediately. That said, I hate the situation with OneDrive, and I don't really know 100% what to do about it until Microsoft gets a clue and stops, trying to actively release installations of computers that are pre-configured to remap your documents into the OneDrive documents folder and automatically pre-configure OneDrive to automatically be backing up as you're running. Ironically, one of the few things that's helping us out in this idiocy that Microsoft has allowed, well, again, all the divisions of Microsoft, they work for one big company, but they don't always play by the same sets of values. But one thing that's actually helped is that OneDrive is limited to 5 gigabytes, and typically, if it's automatically set to back up your entire documents folder, and that includes your ComicBase databases folder, we save 5 backups ourselves. So when you do that, in your ComicBase user, you very frequently overloaded your OneDrive's capacity. That 5 gigs they give you before they start charging you, because that's really the end game of OneDrive. They want you to have to buy OneDrive or Office 365 to get more space, and so it stops trying to back up because it realizes your OneDrive is full. Honestly, if you guys have heard my rants on OneDrive before, if you're using OneDrive, either turn it off, uninstall it, or for God's sake, make it so it's not trying to back up your ComicBase database's directory. If you want to have it back up your ComicBase backups folder, that's fine. But don't have it try to back up anything that will change as you're using it, or your life just gets bad. At the minimum, it beats the hell out of your internet connection for no reason. So anyway, that's the long answer to that one. Okay, let's see here. Davis says, how long does it take for a book to come off my wish list on Atomic Avenue after I've unchecked it in ComicBase? Typically, it comes off the next time that you back up your database to the cloud using ComicBase Sidekick. But make sure, and it won't do it automatically. I'm not even sure what the default is. I think the default is not to do this. Is to make sure in ComicBase Sidekick's preferences, and let me switch over and show you that one. Let's go over to ComicBase Sidekick, which I just closed. Make sure in ComicBase Sidekick's preferences, when you go save to cloud, make sure you have this button here marked, add wanted issues to my Atomic Avenue wish list. It's and it should say it should say, this is not a great name for this one. What it really is doing is synchronizing it. So in other words, if you took it off your wish list, it comes off your Atomic Avenue wish list as well. But anyway, make sure this is checked. If this is not checked and you save to cloud, then it won't do anything at all. But if you do check it and you do a save to cloud, then every time you save your database up, it will also try to take anything new that you put on your want list and add it to your Atomic Avenue want list and remove anything that you've taken off. So that's about the end of that one. Okay, let's see. Hoarder's Hide says, how about an option for backup prompt when you close the program, possibly allow a backup to a different location during the close? There is a way in ComicBase to change where you back up to. So if you go under Setup and you go to Preferences, the default is that ComicBase is always going to back things up to the same folder as the original database. But you also can say, I'm going to save all my backups to a separate hard drive, for instance, and I'm going to save that as my ComicBase backups directory. So you can change that and set a different folder there if you want. There isn't an option to like in real time override this as you're going. I'm not sure if that feels like a win to me. There is, I believe, if you hold down, I think it's the Control key as you back up, might be the Shift key. We did a whole podcast at one point of all the hidden keys in ComicBase. Look for, I think it was ComicBase podcast number 6 or live stream number 6 or so. It was our speed tips one. But I actually scrubbed through all the ComicBase code and found all the secret uses of Control, Alt, and Shift key and all the weird things that it can do. One of them was that it would say, I normally back up, but this one time I want to close without saving a backup. And there was one of those keys you could press which would do that. Again, it's not a visible feature because it's really, really tweaky and you don't normally want to do this. But should you feel a need to do one, I'm not sure if there's a super win. It says, yeah, I normally back up to this location, but this one time I want to back up to a different location. I'm like, I don't know. It feels like if you're going to do something like that, maybe support backing up to multiple locations is a normal thing, but I don't know. And another thing to keep in mind is there's the backups that ComicBase makes every time you exit the program. It'll save by default 5 time-stamped backups, so you can see when the backup was made. They'll all have different names, and it'll automatically delete the oldest one when you save the 6th one. You can increase that number. It can be 20. It can be 100 if you want. Or another thing that happens is Sidekick will also, by default, save your data up to the cloud, where if you're using the newest version of ComicBase, it will both save it into a place that isn't your computer, your cloud account on ComicBase.com. And then the other thing it'll do with the very newest versions of ComicBase is it will actually pull your data that's in stock and integrate so you can see with your mobile application, and which I guess in theory gives us a way that if everything really went to hell, we could maybe even write a script to restore your data from there. It hasn't come up yet. I just realized it was one of the implications of starting to store people's data in order to enable the mobile browse of your live data that we did in the last couple months. So, that's the thing. All right. Let's see here. Jeff says, I do have my database on network share drive, so I can use ComicBase on my desktop and computer. Man, this got to be a reference to something that I missed in the chat. I'm gonna have to push on because unfortunately I am up against a hard stop at 5. Okay, so. All right, I think that I'm caught up on the chat as far. Although Greg wants to remind everyone there is a dedicated thread on the ComicBase message boards for requesting live stream topics and demos. All right, so I'm going to race through. There was the official list of things I was going to talk about on the podcast, and I would feel. By the way, thank you so much for all the questions. That's fundamentally why we do the live stream, is to answer people's questions as they come up. But I also have, just in case people don't have a lot of questions, but I also have just things I want to talk about in general that I'm seeing that I think might be of interest. And one of the things that's come up this time out was news and the lack thereof of things that are clearly moving the world around us that I feel like, this bears some talking a little bit about, and I'm not going to be able to go too long on this thing. I might have to pick it up later on if it winds up being interesting. But that's it's why at least advertised in this podcast, so I want to deliver at least a little bit of that. So let's start with the basics. I'm actually getting tech support calls. This has come up multiple times in the last week of people who come upgrading, especially from older versions of ComicBase, saying, "Wow, I don't know, man, something's wrong because the prices of the back issue market really went up." And I'm like, yeah. Those aren't bugs. That's actually what the back issue market is doing right now. I think right now, ComicBase, I think if you look at the latest stats on it, is listing something like $47 million worth of, if you owned one each of everything ComicBase lists, I think the comics category is worth about $47 million now. The one each of everything that you used to list versus a couple years ago, it's up by like 50%. Now part of that is because we list more stuff. Most of it is because the stuff we're listing is worth so much more, and this is driven. We talked about this over a number of shows, by massive increases in Golden Age books in particular, but bronze, silver, you name it, they're all there's been a flight to collectibles like I've never seen. But the only thing I've seen that's like it in my life is the flight I'm seeing to basically anything of tangible value. I'm not seeing it. I don't follow commodities markets like silver and gold particularly closely, although I'm noticing that my kind of like what do you call it, SHTF investments in like silver are no longer as underwater as they were when I felt obliged to make them. Silver's coming up, but again, I think of commodities as basically being dead money. It'll hold its value, but it never really increases in value. One thing you can do is you can decrease the value of the fiat currencies around them. But what we are seeing, and I'm seeing this every dang day at this point, is increases in real estate, increases in collectibles like at no time in my lifetime. In the 5 years I've been in Tennessee, I'm seeing houses that are, they're being sold not just for hundreds of thousands more than they were, going for, years ago. But I'm seeing this is across almost every major real estate market that I'm watching, with the exception of things like the Bay Area, San Francisco, and even then, that's if you guys watch real estate, you'll know that prices are what they call sticky downward. In other words, if I bought a home for $700,000 and the market softens up and everything, it feels like you've taken my children away if I have to list it for $670, even if the real clearing price, which is the price at which an owner would come in and buy it new, if the clearing price is really $600, it's going to take me a while to realize, to kind of come to grips with the idea that what I had is not worth what it was. You call it sticky downward because people just like, no, I don't want to give it up. On the other hand, what we're seeing right now is prices are just inflating upward like at no time in my life. Officially, news broke today that April inflation came in. It's officially an annualized rate of 4.2%. I'm just going to say this is crap. That's based on, they call it the Consumer Price Index. It's a basket of goods. It's a very strange basket of goods. It's supposed to be things that like a normal person would go out and buy. And then they have a thing called core inflation, which is it's the things you'd go out and buy, but it excludes things like housing and energy, which are also very big movers. Well, they started playing games back in the 80s, I believe. Might have been the 90s. But they started trying to equate for the trying to figure in for substitution effects. So, for instance, I might have, back in the 80s, if I spent $1,000 on a computer, right? Well, I might, that I wouldn't spend $1,000 for my next computer 10 years down the line. I might only have to spend $700, and that new computer would be 5 times faster and very wonderful and things like that. So they're trying to cope with some things that were getting very, very good technologically, and also trying to figure out how do we substitute for other things in life. For instance, if I spend more on might I spend more on air travel if that becomes an option for me in my life versus car travel. Might if gas prices are too high, might I ride the bus? They're trying to figure out those sorts of things, and these things wind up being very, very much judgment calls. So the inflation numbers, if you're old enough to remember them from the 70s, where you start hearing about 10% inflation, you know what that felt like, right? But you're hearing about a 4% inflation market right now, and you go to the store and you're seeing the price of bacon, and you're saying, wait a minute, this is feeling like the 70s right now. How come you're telling me it's only 4%? And the answer is because the official line is saying, well, bacon went up by $1, a pound on the whole thing, but we're pretty sure you'll switch to something else. That's not the way they used to do it. So one of the things that kind of gives lie to this whole thing, and I think the rest of what I want to say for the next 12 minutes or so is, guys, be careful, because reality is getting slippery, and be careful. So one of the things that isn't in the inflation numbers that are officially out there is lumber. Why? Because when they've decided what the basket of goods that you factor in for the Consumer Price Index, lumber isn't something people buy a lot of. Certainly not. It's not on the list of the officially blessed goods. Who buys a lot of lumber? People who build houses. The price of lumber is up 270% a year. That's 3 times. I have neighbors who were putting a deck in, and they got one estimate for their deck, and then they said, the guys came back to them because they hadn't been able to build it in the week that they quoted it, and they came back and said, we're gonna need another $5,000. It's like, what? What the hell do you mean? That's like half the building cost of the whole damn deck. Yeah, that's just, we went to price the lumber, and that's what it came in at. We're literally seeing people, when they're building houses, switching to steel stud construction from wood for residential construction. This is something unheard of. Steel stud, if you guys have ever been in an office building, that's the stuff, if you ever watch an office building being put up, that's how you build office buildings. You're seeing this in the residential space, which is just, again, unheard of that would become a thing. And it's driven by a variety of factors in supply and whatever else of that, but it's a real thing, and it's not being in the official numbers. I guess the major thing I want to say. Other little factoids which go along with this, just the sense that we're not getting the official version. Used car and truck prices up 21% for the year. And again, if you guys have been an auto trader and you're trying to look at cars for your teenage daughter who's about to get her driver's license, you absolutely know that this is a true thing. Gas, officially, so you guys probably heard about the ransomware attack on I think it's called the Colonial Pipeline. I've never heard about the thing until the other day. But apparently it's the gas pipeline that supplies the southeast, or the east and the southeast, which, guess where I am now. I'm on the outskirts of this whole area where it is. News of this was made public a few days ago. Apparently it's been a thing for a while. They've been quietly dealing with the folks who were trying to hold them up for ransom, but the pipeline's been shut down for a while. Gas prices for the year are up $1.20 in my area, just even before all this. The thing that's happening now is, even though officially, no, you're on the outskirts of the area, affected area, and gas outages, that's not a thing. I went back from a concert last night, and the first gas station I went to, giant, twice daily, probably about 15 pumps in the whole thing. Every single one of them was out. Literally, sorry, we have no gas. Drove around finally, because it was one of those things where you're coming back from a place where you knew you should have filled up in the where you were at, but thought, nah, I can make it home. So you're sitting there with 15 miles worth of gas left in your tank, and you're happy as hell to pay $3.30 a gallon, which was again $1.30 more than I paid a year ago. But I'm happy as hell to pay it because I would like to not be dead on the road, pushing my car, because there's no other gas station around that actually has gas. This is getting to be a thing, guys, and I'm not seeing a lot of press that's talking about it. Other things that I'm a little concerned that, again, not being given the straight story about something kind of major. You guys might remember the whole story of net neutrality. If you guys remember back to about a year ago, Ajit Pai, which is just one of the more memorable names somehow of any federal bureaucrat in the FCC, in the Trump administration announced, we're going to end the net neutrality promise. Net neutrality is one of these lovely sounding words. It's like, what's wrong with neutrality? Neutrality sounds good, right? It basically says that you can't charge more for certain types of internet traffic. So one of the big movers of this is things like Netflix. Netflix is putting out, depending on who's estimating or whatever else, but it putting out a very, very solid percentage of the overall traffic of the entire internet. Well, let's say I am a cable provider and I wanted to have the option of saying, hey guys, I'll tell you what, I will give you, $50 a month, gigabit broadband. But if you want to stream more than 200, gigabits of, 200, gigs of Netflix, I'm going to tack on a $10 surcharge, right? Because I know as a provider of, I basically provide the pipe to the internet. I know that a massive, massive amount of my hurt in the world, just like I was saying earlier, hey guys, there's a couple databases out there that keep on hitting Jimmy, and if you guys could clean them up, I would have a lot less friction in my life. So if I'm an internet provider and I'm looking out there and I say, man, if I could get people who are just massive consumers of Netflix, if I could get them to either reel it back a little bit or pay a little bit more, then the guys who are just trying to get to other things on the internet could get there so much faster and cheaper because it would free up a lot of bandwidth for them. So the idea, that's really what net neutrality comes down to, is the idea of saying net neutrality means I can't prioritize or deprioritize, I can't charge more or charge less for different types of traffic. But it also means I don't have the ability to optimize around certain types of traffic either. It means, I don't know, everything's the same. So who loves net neutrality? Well, Netflix. Netflix loves the hell out of net neutrality, and so do other people who are in positions of creating large amounts of network bandwidth. Who doesn't love net neutrality? Well, someone who's trying to service, lots of different folks who have different needs. But the main thing is, without quote-unquote net neutrality, you get to choose. In other words, I can offer you a flat all-you-can-eat plan for everything you want, and I can also offer you a flat, hey, just like on your mobile subscription, I can offer you X many gigs a month for talk and text, but this much for data. I can let you actually choose. I can offer you different things. And if you don't like my plan, no one's making you buy the plan, right? But with net neutrality, you had no ability to offer the plan. All right, now look, I think there's solid arguments on both sides of this one. You could say, well, these guys could abuse their position. These guys could, abuse their, whatever else. That freedom is good, or freedom is going to be used as a way to, get on the backs of someone who you don't like as much. Solid arguments on all sides. The really, really interesting story that broke this week is the FCC took 22 million comments, public comments on net neutrality. It's like, wow, the world is really excited about net neutrality. Everyone, now you're talking about, what are we talking? 8% of the U.S. population wants to weigh in on net neutrality. Oh my God, this is clearly the hot button issue of all hot button issues. Turns out they ran an audit, and all but about 4 million of those were fakes. They were bots. So basically, and there's no clean hands to go around on this one, which is another funny one I'll get to in a sec. But there was something like 18 million of the 22 million comments were astroturfed. They weren't real people. They were robots, and they were basically faked out in order to give the impression to regulators and lawmakers that there's an enormous swell of feeling on the side or the other. Now, that is a woe for anyone who sits there and says, well, how the hell do we get a sense in a democracy of how people feel if 80% of the comments that come in on a matter of great widespread import like this are fake? How are lawmakers meant to understand how people feel about anything if almost everything they get, it isn't just like the form, like, hey, click here if you don't like this, and then we'll send you the form. We're talking about like full-on fake. There never was a person at this address or this email or whatever else writing any of this thing. We're just talking about bot people doing it. So you've overwhelmed the signal in a democratic society, the signal of noise. You sent so much noise down the line here that whatever signal there is, which indicates how people really feel, it's not to be found. You can't hear it over the noise. And now complicating this, of course, is our beloved media. I mean, who are just doing just the best frickin' job. Depending on where you go to, I wanted to show this to you because I thought this was just interesting. So I've kind of given you the straight up numbers on what the auditors found on the whole thing. 18 million fake comments filed with the FCC, right? And there's a Wall Street Journal one. I didn't pay to get to the fine print on the whole thing, but basically came down to 8.5 million of the fake ones came from a campaign from the guys who want to get rid of net neutrality, and 9.3 of them came from guys who, that's the Netflix camp, the guys who love them some net neutrality. In other words, they love some non-penalized bandwidth. But we're talking very similar numbers. Again, no one has clean hands. But what you do have, on the other hand, is it's just, again, if you're a regular in this space, you have no idea of knowing what truth is in terms of how people feel because you've been so swamped out of signal. Well, okay, so then the media gets a hold of this amazing story, and how do they report it? Well, I think I pulled up just, and this is a DuckDuckGo search, right? So this is not is not mainstream as you want. I narrated on the Ars Technica one here just for the sake of the screenshot. But if you look up the relevant story on the whole thing, the headlines are things like ISPs funded 8.5 million fake comments opposing net neutrality. You say, those bastards! I can't believe 8.5 million fake comments. AT&T lies about net neutrality law, by net neutrality. Biggest flipboard ISPs paid for 8.5 fake FCC comments. I did a few searches like this one. Wired, ISPs funded 8.5 million fake comments, etc. So the impression anyone would get from reading this thing is, oh my God, those bastards went and faked 8.5 million signatures. But wait, what was that original number again? When we first started talking about the story, there was a number of fake comments that were out there. What was that number? Well, that was 18 million. So what's this 8.5 all of a sudden? And what it comes down to is, and you can read stuff, you have to hunt a little harder for it. You find out if you read the other side of the political spectrum, they will happily talk about all the people on the other side who faked 9 point whatever million fake comments, including there's one guy who, whether he was hired or not, but if they traced it to one particular guy's efforts, put in like 7.7 million fake comments just by himself, which, I thought, wow, well, if you get rid of one guy, is it fair to say that it was really corporate bad guys doing the other thing, and it was really just, it was only 2 million fake ones on the other side, so maybe the one side is more virtuous. And I thought, wait a minute, when you hire a consortium to generate fake comments, how is that any different than I hired a hacker to generate fake comments? I mean, it's the same deal, right? I mean, I have no idea how many actual human beings were involved in the faking. I mean, it's more of a job question than anything else. But anyway, back to the whole thing, though, is we have a story where the entire premise of it was a lie, and now the news reporting on it, and you can find the lie that fits your political views if you want very easily. But the news reporting on it is another lie, where they'll tell you only... if you only read the headlines, the only part you'll ever hear is that those guys on the other side completely tried to subvert democracy, or whatever you want to take, and they'll only report the half of the story where the other guys did it. They won't report the part that they did, or at least that the guys that they're sympathetic to did. And I'm like, oh my God, this is insane. And here's where I really got to wrap, because there's so much more to say about the whole thing. Guys, it comes down to, there is a lot of stuff we are seeing in the comics market and everything else. I'm seeing it every time I walk into a comic shop. I'm seeing it every time I go to the store to buy food and where else, where clearly the official line is not telling the full story. When you go looking for the full story, it is being filtered so thoroughly by political lenses that you are not getting anything like reliable information on the whole thing. So you wind up feeling like you're a crazy person. Well, must be my one gas station. Must be my one store. I better shop someplace else. Until you realize it's not just my one market. It's not just my whole thing. It's everywhere. And what's the lie is what you're being told about the situation. Where it comes down, there's a thing called the Gell-Mann amnesia effect. Gell-MANN. Worth looking up. It's fascinating. Popularized by Michael Crichton, by the way. But basically, I think Murray Gell-Mann, I think was the name of the guy. But anyway, it comes down to this. Take an area you know really, really well. For me, comic books and computers, right? And you're reading USA Today, you're reading whatever paper you want, and you come across an article about that thing you know really, really well, and you realize the guy writing this article knows not a damn thing about it and is lying to you about every aspect of the whole thing, because, again, this is your field, this is your thing. You say, well, this is ridiculous. How the hell can they allow this crap? And then you flip to the next story, and you forget instantly that, as soon as you turn to a field that isn't something you know very well, you forget instantly that I should be distrusting the next article the same way that I distrust this one that I know very, very well. The same level of editorial ethics applies to the next article just as well. The same level of reportage. It might even be the same guy writing the article, but you forget about it. You literally get amnesia. It's some kind of mental illness we all have built into us, where we desperately want to believe the story, and we want to be told stories that go along with our thinking, and so forth. But as a result, that thing I spent years studying, that every day I think about, I'm able to overcome my own cognitive dissonance and say the source is wrong. But the second I don't have that level of confidence that comes from my entire physical experience, in my years of training, as soon as I don't have that, I start going along with whatever narrative I'm having pushed on me. This is insane. I mean, it is one of those choices where humans, we are just insane this way, and it's also one of these things I feel like it's impossible to counteract entirely, but I would say we are living through a period of absolute disconnect between the stories we're being fed about the state of things like, again, trends I'm seeing every damn day. This is becoming my field of expertise. This is just collectible values and things like that. It's like, man, I'm sorry. When people question it, when they give me tech support calls, I am literally checking as multiple verified sources of what actually did things sell for, and they really did sell for this thing, right? I mean, whether or not a sales transaction occurred or not is not a matter of opinion, right? It did, and you can say, well, it's a fluke. Yeah, but if 5 flukes in a row happen, that's not a fluke anymore, right? We are seeing amazing increases in collectible pricing, in real estate pricing, in things like that. They're not affected in the bottom lines and things like that. And what we're being told about so many of these stories is not, man, it's at best self-serving. It's certainly not complete. And I'm just going to say, guys, be careful out there, because even the people who aren't actively lying to you aren't typically giving you a full story. At minimum, I'd say 2 things. 2 rules for life, right? I'm now either Jordan Peterson or the Red Skull, but I only have the 2 rules right for this broadcast, because we're out of time. Number 1, read past the headline, right? If you read a headline, most people, I think some people say 80-90% of people will only read the headline, and that's what they take home from the story. Read past the headline and see if that really tells the story, or if the headline is just there to give an impression that's in accordance with a preconceived notion, which, if so, you're not doing yourself any favors. I mean, it may make you feel better or more secure in your place, but it will lead you to being surprised a lot in life. So read past the headlines, see if the story really agrees with it. And that's number 1. Number 2 is if you catch someone out and out lying to you. I mean, there's being mistaken and I'm mistaken all the time. I mean, you have an impression at one point, and it turns out in light of future events that's not what really came out to be. There are times when, I saw this thing, but then I learned some new facts, and then it kind of shades, how I see things, whatever else. At which point, if the guy was willing to say, hey, I've learned some new stuff, I don't really feel that way anymore. That guy didn't lie to you the first time out. He was telling you the world as best as he could see at the time. I mean, I try to tell the world to you guys as best as I can see it at the time right now, and even when I can be wrong about stuff about ComicBase. I've had folks like in the chat correct me about like, oh no, that's not how it works, Bickford. I'm like, oh yeah, I checked. Yeah, I was wrong. Anyway, but you can have folks who are wrong, but they're not lying, right? If you have folks who are lying to you, in other words, they're telling you a story that they want you to believe, and they know that the facts don't back it, but they want you to believe that story so much, guys, you gotta not do the Gelman thing with them. You gotta get these people out of your life. If it's a newspaper that habitually you're reading stories and you know that they're not telling you the truth, or a news source or a podcast or whatever else, you know what? Mistakes are one thing, but if they keep making the same mistakes, or if they keep on doing things where they know it's not the truth and they don't come clean and they don't get better, you gotta lose them and you gotta find somebody more reliable. I think a lot of the problem, is that there is no penalty in this day and age for being a lying son of a bitch. In other words, you can be internet famous or you can be world famous for making documentaries, making whatever else that tell things that are just not true. Or you can, and if it's a comforting enough story, if the right people like your version of the events and everything else, you can become a very wealthy and popular person and suffer no social impact for being a guy who said, wait a minute, every single thing you said in that story, the people who were there, the people who saw it, the accounts of the event, whatever the thing is, do not agree with you. The reality of the situation is not what you said. And that person will be like, well, that's what I saw it. It was my truth, right? And that guy doesn't get excised from society. Man, we're going to be insane trying to keep all the different versions of truth, straight in our heads. We have to start excising the people whose version of reality is not the same as observable reality on your own side. Anyway, that's the two you get for now. I gotta go, folks. Guys, thank you for coming, and we'll talk about something a little bit lighter next time. Anyway, till next time, I'll see you then.